So the second part of the second season of the long-awaited hit supernatural fantasy drama The Sandman Season 2 Part 2 has finally landed, and I have to say it was one hell of an emotional rollercoaster from start to finish. A true tearjerker. I mean, that final episode, honestly, everybody I'm sure was just weeping, spoiler warning, because of the death of the brilliant Morpheus character. I just cannot believe it. I know it's obviously true to the source material, but the way in which it was executed, firstly, was different to what happened in the comic book material, and we will be breaking all of that down. The stories, the characters, the changes, and the original plan for this adaptation was to spread it across 4 seasons so that we can truly deep dive into the brilliant storylines that take place with Morpheus. But because of the fact that the first season, which I honestly think is some of the best TV ever made, was just so expensive from a VFX perspective, Netflix annoyingly just wanted it all condensed and completed in one season, which is of course season 2. And so I think as a result, season 2 just feels so rushed. It is a little bit bittersweet because I am glad that we at least got a bit of a conclusion compared to a lot of other hit shows would just get left on a big cliffhanger. So there is that, but I honestly think that they would have been better if they had stuck to their original plan and if Netflix had actually followed that 4-season vision. Now it is great that it does follow the same broad strokes from the original comic book material, but I personally just find TV and film just a much more immersive experience. And I have to say, with the Sandman in particular, it's so visceral. And so I feel like even though you do see a lot of other characters that arguably you've been with a lot longer than you have with Dream, but their passing just doesn't hit in the same way that Morpheus's one did. And so I'm still in mourning. Now, there was so much chat across season 2 about the impact of all of the things that Morpheus has gone through in terms of making him become the person that he is today. And the first domino effect that started all of this was the events with Roderick Burgess in the first episode of season 1. Honestly, some of the best TV again was in episode 1 where Dream is trapped, and as a result of being in that state for 100 years has just changed his perspective, and so everything that he goes through across season 1 and season 2 has just made him so much more emotional. And so even though he was always connected with people through the dreaming, now he feels even deeper with the emotional connection, which is why he obviously wanted to save Nada, wanted to spill family blood with Orpheus, as he's obviously a lot more connected to people than all of the other Endless from a humanity perspective. But I feel like even though all of that is really understandable, I still think it is such a big leap in terms of him just being on this long, hopeless suicide path, and there was so much foreshadowing from the first episode of season 2 about the fact that Dream might be killed off. And it's really ironic as he was so connected with Shakespeare, as it is a true Shakespearean tragic flaw in terms of his humanity and emotional side of this character coming to the surface, ultimately being the thing that leads to his demise. I honestly just feel like it's such a big character shift from the super confident, super self-obsessed, super wise character that we see in season 1, and I do love those aspects of him still in season 2, where he is really quietly overconfident and feeling like he is a little bit more superior to other people, to now all of that just fully being pulled from this character to now feeling so hopeless, and also going from a character who truly loves the dreaming to now feeling like he's really burdened by it, and then saying to his sister Death that he's just so tired. Honestly, I just felt it, and I just felt so sorry for this guy. I mean, in his defense, he did go through the motions in terms of trying to speak to his father Time and his mother Night Space, and both of them annoyingly didn't want to change the universal laws. I feel like they should have, because if it's ultimately that person's request, and it's not as if they can't speak to Orpheus to validate and confirm it, I feel like he should have been excused, because he was basically doing something that Orpheus had been asking him to do for his whole entire life. I still think he should have taken his dad up on his offer, because he could have changed one or two things, I'm sure. For example, Orpheus could have avoided his own suicide mission, and maybe he could have just kept his body in that case. Or maybe there could have been a timeline in which he was able to bring his wife back, and then maybe she would have lived a little bit longer than what she actually did, and so Orpheus wouldn't have had a similar burden, and then maybe Orpheus would have been happy to at least live a bit longer so that Morpheus ultimately doesn't have to kill him. And it was the ultimate gut punch when Delirium is basically telling Dream, you know, there could be other possibilities in terms of outcomes, and so Dream himself said, oh okay, so there is hope. And then this just gets completely dashed and destroyed when it's basically hopeless. So even though they didn't explicitly say it, I feel like it's very similar to what Time was saying in terms of like ultimately it will lead to the same outcome. And so I just feel really, really bad for for Dream, as ultimately he just lost his vigor and zest for life, which you can really see was something that was driving him across season 1, and he truly loved, and I feel like more than any other character really, took his responsibilities and duties so seriously. So I personally just don't feel like it's good writing when he was saying that he's so tired and over it by the end to death. Also, there was no big battle this season at all, and they definitely had the opportunities in which to do that. For example, with Lucifer, with Loki, with the Fates, with the fairies. Maybe they wanted to, but all of the VFX budget reduction maybe meant that they couldn't have done, but it's just such a shame, as they potentially could have had some awesome sequences. Now, I know it does follow the comic books, for example, Lucifer wanting to hand over her position of the Guardian of Hell and wanted to trick Dream with it, but I just feel like they could have just done a few more grander things. I feel like the grandest thing that they did do was trapping Azil, but I feel like outside of that, it was a little bit disappointing and a little bit lackluster that we didn't have it, and that we instead just had a massive goodbye. I guess the reasoning for that is because the overarching theme in this season is all about life and death, and how you should appreciate your life while you have it, and that actually death really does give life more meaning. So let's talk about the most controversial part of season 2, which is of course the passing of the Mantle, which is not, incidentally, comic book accurate at all, as basically Dream is supposed to be reborn into this new shiny new version of himself, but it's effectively still the same character. So they could have had Tom Sturridge being the character that Daniel turns into, as Morpheus does continue being Dream himself, just with a new, more hopeful and positive outlook, but instead they butchered and destroyed Morpheus and gave Daniel a brand new different personification. And I know none of it technically is Daniel Hall's fault, but it's just a real shame and such a bitter pill to swallow, as he's basically just taking over Morpheus's life. And it's another gut punch, as I feel like this version of Dream is able to be fully accepted by his siblings, and now all of the Endless group seem to be really united. Maybe one of the reasons for this is that the other Endless characters, especially Desire, just had an innate hatred for Morpheus, and maybe they're going to be nicer to Daniel Hall. Although I did really like Daniel Hall's really powerful line to his mother, where he was basically saying, "You disfigured my life from a newborn into this Endless character because of your actions." And speaking of Desire, I always felt like in the back of my mind, all of this has been Desire's doing, as Desire has been the puppet master, as even in season 1, he is obviously the grandfather of Rose and then wanted Dream to kill Rose, and so unintentionally over there could have spilled family blood, and now Desire maybe once again has now done it explicitly. And so many characters have unfortunately had to pay the price because of Desire's actions. So let's look at the main storyline beats across this season. So it opens up with Destiny calling a family meeting, and right from the forefront he is foreshadowing some big event involving Dream, and over there Desire just cannot help themselves in terms of really poking fun at Dream's failed love life, and this is where we're introduced to the character of Nada. And I feel like so many characters are just constantly criticizing Dreams for the decisions that he makes. For example, trapping that character in an endless sleep because of the fact that he was helping his father, Roderick Burgess, keep Dream in this globe, and of course Nada spending 10,000 years suffering in hell. He ultimately then does rescue her from Azil, but before that he obviously has this sequence with Lucifer, and I thought it was really clever how Lucifer was saying, "Look, I'm not going to do anything bad for you while you're inside hell," but the second they get out of hell, she kind of tricks him to now be the owner of hell, which leads into the next big storyline involving the banquet, and who is Dream going to choose as the next big successor. And I loved it how all of these big supernatural characters are now basically flocking to Dream's realm. Even though he didn't ultimately select Odin, I feel like he could have still bargained with him to find out where destruction was, and then maybe he wouldn't have gone down the tragic path with Orpheus. And then speaking of Orpheus, he causes his dad so much chaos. Firstly, not listening to him in terms of really valuing your life, then not listening to Death when she is like explaining you have to follow the rules really clearly if you want to get your dead wife back, and then not listening to his mother when she is like, "Look, stay away because there are so many characters that just want to butcher you," and then emotionally blackmails his dad to kill him, knowing that he's going to end his life as well. And then we have the Fates who cut the yarn of Dream's life, and then are just so evil in terms of taking so much pleasure of destroying Dream's reality. And I just think there should have been more of a case in terms of Dream didn't do anything out of his own malicious intent, and it's just such a shame that he didn't have a proper court case or something, because I feel like all of the characters could see why he did what he did from a euthanasia perspective. And then we have Loki, and Dream spares his life instead of leaving him trapped for his entire existence, but because he's he's so evil, he too just wants to ruin Dream's life, and he's so arrogant because if he had just helped Dream a little bit, he could have then continued on living instead of being trapped for the rest of his existence. Now let's go through all of the main casting characters now, so I just have to say Tom Sturridge deserves to win all of the awards, because if there ever was a category for the embodiment of perfect casting, he needs to win it hands down, because his portrayal of Morpheus and Dream is just sublime. I just absolutely love how stoic and confident this character is, but also is able to learn a lot. I love how seriously he takes his duties. I feel like every time he's on screen, he has just got such star presence. And I love how every single episode, he's got a brand new black cool outfit. And I just feel like the concept of dreams is just so fascinating. And I just feel like Tom Sturridge is the entry point for the audience in such a good way. And then I just love the dream team. So for example, we have Lucy and the librarian, who even though he was a little bit mean to in season 1, always has his back. Loved Matthew the Raven. I feel like Patton Oswalt played him to perfection. I wish there were a couple more scenes with these two together, as I loved Matthew and Dream together as a duo in the mortal realm in season 1. And then we've of course got Mark Hamill brilliantly playing Marv. Very similarly, I feel like they could have done so much more with him, and it truly is heartbreaking when you think that he's been destroyed. I just would have loved a few more missions with this group together with Dream. Oh my god, those sequences could have been electric. And Fiddler's Green was really nice as well. I feel like he gave the new Daniel a really cool message, which is around death does give life meaning, so don't always necessarily bring everyone back for the sake of it. And even though it is so tragic as is during the ceremony of Morpheus passing away, you can kind of see where he's coming from. And speaking of the funeral, I feel like bringing back every single character for that sequence and spreading it out across an entire episode was so heart-wrenching. And even though you were just crying across that entire episode, it was a nice way to at least say goodbye to this character. I loved both the original Lady Joanna Constantine and the more modern version of Constantine as well. Both of them are so clever, and they go on really cool adventures with Dream. I wish we could have seen a couple more sequences again with all of them, but of course Dream had to stay in the dreaming, and so instead sent the Corinthian. So I loved seeing Boyd Holbrook back, as he was so good as the Corinthian in season 1. I do feel like the romance with Constantine was a little bit forced, but at least they made a good double act and were able to find Loki. And speaking of Loki, he was truly evil, and I feel like he was able to play the villain role that Corinthian left open, as of course Corinthian is now more of a heroic character. So I feel like at least in the minimum, even though he was truly evil, he was able to fill that void in a good way. And I just hate the fact that Loki truly did destroy and pretty much did ruin everything for Dream. I also feel like the Fates aren't as squeaky clean as they like to think they are, as they fully manipulated and used and abused Lyta Hall, and then when she did everything that they wanted her to, they just abandoned her. So it really does show how you have to be so careful about who you are trusting, as Dream did go to them first and was trying to explain himself, but they were just so negative that they just viewed it all as a bribe. And then speaking of Lyta Hall, I mean, you can see this character as being a tragic hero as well, as she lost her partner, she lost her child, and then was fully used and manipulated by the Fates, and none of all of that you could argue was her fault. I thought that they would have done a little bit more with Rose Walker, especially considering the fact that she was such a big and important character in season 1. And you could see that Nuala had such a crush on Dream, and she was able to be willing to just do anything that she can to stay in that realm. Unintentionally, of course, she was one of the other characters that contributed towards the imminent demise of Dream. I feel like he should have been a little bit more clever in terms of why is he being called, instead of just immediately teleporting himself over there. But it was all down to the jealous queen being like, why did Dream give you this? It was nice to have Douglas Booth there as Nuala's brother. I feel like even though he was explored a little bit, there could have been a little bit more depth with his contribution to the storyline. So now let's talk about all of the other Endless characters. So I love the character of Death. I loved her relationship with Dream. I feel like out of all of the Endless characters, them two had the strongest relationship. And I feel like Death was always really nice to everybody as they were passing away. And I feel like equally with Dream, it was so tragic when you can firstly see her with the Dream team catching that orb, and then just being a little bit reluctant and sad herself when she knows that this is the end of the line for Dream. I know I said it before, but I'll say it again. I still don't believe that the character of Dream was saying that he's really tired. Maybe he said it so that Death doesn't feel as bad. I feel like Desire was definitely set up at the end of season 1 to be Dream's biggest adversary, and I honestly think they were, as they were just so desperate to get Morpheus to spill family blood. And like I said before, I honestly think they were the puppet master to make him do so. And they definitely did drop a few hints that at the end of the day, desire from a person's innate emotions will basically make them do anything. I love the character of Delirium. She is very crazy, very Harley Quinn inspired. I wish that they would have explained the real reason why she stopped being Delight. And I loved her relationship with Dream as well, as in the beginning, Dream is basically using her, doesn't really respect her, but then definitely does grow to eventually respect her a lot, and then is happy to go with her on her quest to find destruction, but ultimately in order to do so, he had to reacquaint himself with his long-lost son. And I definitely feel like there could have been another way for Orpheus to have continued on living. Maybe Dream could have helped him somehow find his body again, maybe he could have brought him into the dreaming. I feel like he could have done something instead of spilling family blood. Despair is the character that we never really know that much about. I did like the fact that when she was in her funeral speech, she was referencing the other Despair that passed away before her, and actually that is comics accurate. And even though there were only 1 or 2 scenes really where it was Despair and Dream, I feel like they could have been interesting if they had really explored that partnering a little bit more. And then Destiny is very stoic, very serious, very distant, and I kind of hated his line when he was speaking at the funeral where he was like, look, eventually everyone that has passed will be forgotten. And then I loved it that Lucian was like, look, I will never forget Morpheus because I'm so connected to him. So overall, I'm sure you can tell, I absolutely loved the Sandman. I loved this world, I loved this universe, loved the characters, loved all of the casting. I wish it was still ongoing and that we truly got that 4-season vision, but I'm at least very grateful for the 20 episodes that we did properly get. And I just feel like there's so many stories and inspirations, incidentally enough, that Dream was able to pass on to everybody. And even though it was truly heart-wrenching and emotional, at least we got a conclusion to the storyline. And I'm sure we're all going to be in mourning for a very long time for the brilliant Dream character. But as far as season 2 of the Sandman is concerned, I did think it was really epic, but I do think it could have been a little bit better if it wasn't so rushed and if they had a couple more epic battles and truly clever moments like they had in season 1. But nonetheless, it was just still such a magnificent and remarkable watch, and so for all of those reasons, I'm going to give season 2 of the Sandman a solid 8 out of 10. Now I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of the Sandman season 2? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.